The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Lighting Controls Podcast with Ron Kuzma and Webster Marsh. Just want to take a minute to thank Adam Grant for being on the show this week. It's a fantastic episode, a very unique industry that he's in, and I think you guys will really appreciate this one. Just want to remind everyone that this week's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's also financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. And you should check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com, in case you haven't checked it out. But if you have checked it out, check it out again, because there's always great merch, news, and episodes to check out on that website. So check it out, and here's Adam. Welcome back, everyone, to the Lighting Controls Podcast, where we just love to talk about lighting controls. Today, we've got Adam Grant. Adam, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Adam, obviously. I kind of got my start very young in church. I've got a lighting and, stage lighting and audio background. And then I kind of fell into the car wash industry doing industrial control systems and eventually had the idea to marry the two, which has since kind of grown into more than just lighting for car washes. It's grown into, like architectural control platform. So I've got a partner. He's a very talented software developer, and kind of with our brains combined, we ended up with what we are today with Apollo, our control system. So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Adam. I think what's interesting about your story is that you originated in religious environment, which from Ron and my perspective is a theatrical environment for lighting. Mm-hmm. And then you entered an industrial environment, which is what I would consider the exact opposite when it comes to lighting and lighting controls, because in theater, it's all about the result, the perspective, the story you're telling, that you're shaping the space with lighting, and you're giving this magical effect. Whereas in industrial, it's all about the endurance, whether it can deal with caustic or hazardous environments. And so to kind of marry those two is a really unique venture. And so I was curious, what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been a lot of pretending that I knew what I was doing along the way and figuring it out as I go. I think it's been exactly what was supposed to happen in a lot of senses, because just like you said, when you look at the theatrical side of it, it's all about the impression to the person that's viewing it. And when you look at a lot of architectural lighting control systems, you don't really get that aspect, because when it comes to stage, you've got typically a human that's running the show, or at least, triggering the cues, but they've spent a lot of time behind the scenes designing it and building it and time syncing it and all of those things. And there just isn't, at least from what I can find, there was never anything that did that on an architectural level. And that's kind of where we sit right now in the industry, in this weird niche of right in between both of them. It's kind of interesting.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because, in theater, you have that live person hitting the go button, and that go button really is activating something that somebody has spent time designing. It's not just a random assortment of effects that happen. I mean, granted, there are definitely times where that is the case, but in most situations, you're going to have this pre-designed effect. And I think car washes, in a way, kind of lends itself to that, because you're railroaded into a track, and so there's almost like you can pre-design all the effects ahead of time and still have the same effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you say that. That is, in paraphrased words, a popular thing that, we would use in sales calls, because there is on average 3 to 4 minutes of very dedicated customer attention from the time that the conveyor actually throws a roller and it grabs the vehicle and it starts pushing them through. If you can peel them away from Instagram or TikTok or whatever they're on their phone, that is dedicated showtime, more or less, that they can go and get some type of very specific experience. And we do design it, and I assume, I'm sure we'll talk more about kind of how that works behind the scenes. But yeah, our app is the person pressing go. That's the way it works. Yeah.
Sure. And so, just curious what the value added argument here is. I mean, for me, a car wash is just a car wash. You drive in and you get your car washed and then you leave. Whereas it sounds like
Mhm.
you're creating an enriching experience more than just a car wash.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I'm sure that you've seen, there's a lot of car washes going up all across the United States, and Canada's growing, and it's there's a lot of competition, and chemistry has gotten so good that a lot of these car washes, they just wash a good car. So it becomes a question of how do you start to differentiate yourself. And I think car washing is just where we started because that was just the connections that I had originally. I think there's still a lot more applications for it, but in the case of
Mhm.
car washes, we're seeing on these show nights, mile and a half, 2 mile long lines of cars waiting to get in for these haunted tunnel experiences and Christmas shows and 80s night, classic rock. I mean, all sorts of stuff that we can do. And it's just most people don't think about a car wash in the first place. They go and they drive in one side and they come out the other and it washes, and they don't think that they're going through a building sized robot.
Mhm.
And there's a ton of technical things going on behind the scenes that makes it work. But then now, even more so, they're like, I never ever would have thought, that there's like this whole audio and lighting experience that can happen, and kids love it. In some ways, I think COVID made it easier because people, especially in the beginning of 2020, that was right when we were kind of emerging into the market. And that's something that families would do. They would pile up in the minivan and go to the car wash. It was something to keep the kids preoccupied.
So
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of like a meal and a show. You have to go eat. So,
mhm,
package in a show and you've got yourself an even better experience. So, as a
absolutely.
result, so anyways, I mean, you're right. I think this kind of application transcends car washes. It's not just specific to car washes, but it does seem
Mhm.
to have a really solid foundation in where car washes are headed. So there's definitely other places that this sort of automated experience could benefit in the architectural lighting design world.
Absolutely. You look at, again, this is common things that we use in sales conversation is most people don't understand. They see lights and they just think they're lights, especially when you're talking about from an architectural sense, most
Mhm.
people don't think about the behind the scenes, and a lot of people don't care. They just want it to work and they want it to look good. So when you try to explain pixel mapping to a customer, it just goes right over their head. They don't understand the complexity behind it and the value of pixel mapping versus, you see all the time these RGB strips around like a strip mall, the windows that are outlined and they're like flashing
Mhm.
like a carnival and it looks terrible. And, there's a big difference between pixel mapping versus something that's just outputting some linear effect out of a port, a DMX port or whatever
For
it is.
for our listeners, do you mind just explaining the difference?
Yeah, so pixel mapping is taking a converting it to digital space. So you take the exact position of lighting, and according to where it's at on a building or a stage backdrop or whatever it's applied to, you're actually mapping it out to scale. And what you could do with that is when you play, it's I'd call it akin to kind of like a video file. If you were to play a video file over your total bounds of the stage, for instance, wherever, if you're running a gradient from left to right or right to left, wherever the LED is in the digital space, once it hits that LED, it changes, the color changes. So what you get with that is really fine control, and the immersion is considerably better than anything else because now, there's life of light, it's kind of like a living, breathing machine, when you have it moving around you and in and out of the building, it's it's just considerably different than just playing some effects in a single direction.
Mhm.
So,
So I mean, comparing that to just a straight linear effect, what is the
mhm.
difference there?
Well, I mean, if you had to turn a roof line, for instance, if you were on a skyscraper or a car wash, it doesn't matter. If you were illuminating a roof line with some type of pixel tape or, a diffused direct view fixture, it doesn't know that it's turning a corner. So if you just have a roof line and you were to play, let's say you were 300 pixels long, right? And if you were to play an effect down it, sure, it's gonna move around the rectangle because it doesn't know any better. But the second that you introduce something else below it, for instance, what if you had wall washers on the wall? Well, if they're not digitally mapped to one another, whether it's 2D or 3D, they're not going to line up with one another. It's just going to be a gradient that just flows, kind of arbitrarily.
So I mean, ultimately, the difference between a pixel map and just any kind of color changing wash light, whether it has high granularity or is very coarse in how it's controlled, it's really about the intelligence behind it, how you are
Mhm.
communicating between those two types of fixtures so that they understand geographically, at least in a 2D plane space, where it
Mhm.
is in relationship to other fixtures. That way you can create a higher resolution effect. It's like if I were to take multiple monitors and map those to my desktop, then I would have a relative geographic orientation with all of that, so that I have, if I move my mouse to one monitor, it's just a continuous
Mhm.
stream. Whereas
Yeah.
if I didn't connect those monitors, I didn't say, okay, you're oriented in this specific way, I might move my mouse cursor over to the right and might pop up in an area where I didn't expect it to pop up. Or it may not
Mhm.
pop up at all because it doesn't realize that there's some kind of connection between the two.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, no, that's a great comparison.
ultimately that's what you're doing with your software, is you're creating this mapped experience.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. And it's interesting because under the hood, pixel mapping really is it's a screen. You're screening the effect through a file. When you look at the software underneath it, it really is like taking a screen, like a monitor, like in your example, and just placing it over a viewport, and then wherever the LED is in that space, it just gets applied. So you can end up with really coarse, like a TV, like TV lines you could do, and you could play a meme on some of our buildings if you wanted to, some GIF if you wanted to. But yeah, it knows where it's at in space. And the interesting thing is you can have a lighting network that is all of the exact same hardware, the same DMX, the same amount of channels and everything, but without the software that knows where it's at, it doesn't. The linear effect that you would get out of that port from one piece of software could be an entire pixel mapped experience with all the same hardware. So it really does come down to the software and positionally where everything is.
So speaking of the software, so we're obviously used to standard architectural controllers that we use in this industry. What is so special and different about your software? What have you done to sort of create an easier user experience to create those 3D maps?
Yeah, so we keep the actual mapping in-house. So we exist as a service and we've got installation requirements and there's a certain spec that has to be hit. It's pretty flexible still, so we can adjust for, maybe there was not enough lights planned here. It's not so exact where if it's not perfect to what our drafter designs up, that the system is broken. But we exist kind of like Spotify for lighting sequences. So our app allows the customers to build playlist and schedule the playlist when you want them to run for certain hours. And then there's also overrides that can happen if there's particular areas or light, that they want white. In a car wash, for instance, it's pretty common. They want the vacuums to be white, but after hours, they don't want the vacuums to be white. They want them to be in all of their pixel mapped glory. So there is sequences that we design, but we process per location. And I think that's where we're really different. For those that are familiar with Madrix is a really powerful pixel mapping platform. And it just does some of the most beautiful art installations, and it's phenomenal. And people love it. And Madrix, though, happens on a local level. And from our perspective, that was a difficult thing to ship as a product because we did look at Madrix. I was looking at all of the commercial options at the time. It was like 2018 that I was doing all my market research, and nobody was, from what I could tell, nobody was allowing for pixel mapping where it baked the programs into a single file that we could distribute. So that was kind of the hang up for us. Was most architectural happens where there's a local server and there is some distributor nearby. Maybe they're a couple hours away, but they go and do the setup, they do the configuration, and then there's like a handful of sequences or designs that run on the building, and that's kind of it. And from a management perspective, that just doesn't work when you're trying to ship a control system that can apply to many buildings all across the US and not use a distribution network. We do everything direct. Maybe that'll change one day. But what we did is we took pixel mapping as a concept, and then we said, okay, well, what do you need in architecture? And you need zones. Zones is a really big thing that, people need because there's, like I said, the vacuums, for instance, or maybe it's some canopies underneath an awning at a hotel. You need zone control, but you also need, for the experience to be better than everybody else, maybe that's biased, but for the experience to be really good, you still need pixel mapping. So nobody was pixel mapping. Nobody was doing pixel map zone control. And then furthermore, nobody was taking those two concepts and baking it into a cloud-based application that we could manage remotely, check on device health, look at logs, have a full status of the network and all of the things that we can do. So it was the marrying of those three core things, in my opinion, that have made this platform really different.
So, I mean, you tossed a ton of jargon out, which I really appreciate. But I just want for our listeners to understand, because, I mean, some of the jargon you used overlaps with common everyday jargon. And I want to make it very clear that this is not common everyday jargon that you're using. So, I mean, like local programming. What specifically are you talking about when you say local programming?
Got it. Okay, I'll slow down. So
No,
the local side of it, yeah. I'm bad about that. I'll just like go in and just assume, everybody has the knowledge that's up here. So on the local side, it would be the Omni Hotel is a great example. For those that have an Omni Hotel, it's a really popular hotel chain. They're very fancy. It's 5-star hotel. And they often do some type of RGB LED based art-esque installation built into their architecture. You see it in a lot of major cities. Dallas has it, it's all over. And they do pixel mapping, but it's actually very basic under the hood. And there was an article I stumbled across that talked about the company that did the installation, and they have to go on site with a flash drive and plug in a flash drive if they want to change it. Or if they want to add new things, for instance.
And so that's local programming,
so that,
where it's stored locally, can't be modified from the cloud or anything like that. And then zoning and pixel
is those two terms don't really go together, I found. Zone control would be grouping it's a way to group your fixtures or group chunks of architecture. I mean, really, it could be anything, but for the sake of
Mhm.
example, let's say we want to group all of our canopies together on a hotel. Well, that's great. And we can make them white during normal business hours. For instance, when they're open, they want it to be white for safety reasons so people don't trip on the sidewalk. Well, what about at nighttime when the doors are locked and the doors are closed? Well, maybe they want that to be integrated with the rest of the building. So maybe we're playing we're supporting maybe a cancer month, for instance, and we're playing purple up the building in a certain direction. Well, when you have the zone control and you want to turn it off, you still need those fixtures to be mapped in space. Otherwise, they're just, gonna flash at a totally arbitrary time. Like if you have a gradient that is, let's say, black to purple and maybe lavender, so you have a couple variations of purple. Well, when black flows, we all know light fixtures can't do black. Black is just they're turned off. It's a zero value as far as DMX is concerned. So if it's not in the right spot, if when you're flowing black, you might have a random light over here on a canopy that just turns purple when everything else at that elevation is black.
Mhm. And
That
so
answer your question?
ultimately, yeah, so ultimately when we're talking about zoning
Okay.
and pixel mapping, it's not like your 0 to 10 volt zone where it's, this group of fixtures here and it's always going to be this group of fixtures here. It's much more dynamic than that. It's more about how you
Hmm.
select the array and control it so they all have a cohesive effect when you're running media
Absolutely.
through it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's all in the software. So at the end of the day, the hardware doesn't know any better. The hardware that we push it's ArtNet, and we just use ArtNet to DMX nodes. It could be ArtNet to anything, or it could be, SACN. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But
And then
the
so
hardware doesn't
off
know any better.
Off of that, you use the term distribution, which is also a term that is commonly used. But I think in this, you're
Mhm.
talking about ArtNet distribution. So do you mind just giving a little breakdown on what that is?
Well, okay, yeah. So we use we set the software up with an internal, how do I phrase this? We set it up where our channel value, you say something?
Nope.
Our
Go ahead.
channel values are arbitrary. So they start at zero and they just infinitely go up. And then from there, depending on what protocol we want to interface with, most commonly we use some type of ArtNet transceiver just because it's easier to do it over the network. Um,
Which is
we
something
just
that
have a
communicates
driver
ArtNet
essentially.
backwards and forwards.
Hmm. Yeah, it could be ArtNet to DMX, which is most often what we ship, but we also do ArtNet to like single wire SPI, what you see with every pixel tape out there, pretty much. Single data signal, or also the dual when it has a clock and a data signal.
And so this
Um,
is the communication
so we tried
protocol
to
that's
make it.
coming from your
Mhm.
software out to the fixture.
Yes, yeah. So from like a network topology standpoint, we do have an internal network. It is connected to the internet because it is cloud based,
Mhm.
but we take the information in from our servers and we push it to the local server that is cloud managed. So we push it through the network. And then once it is in our internal network, then we can communicate with all of the ArtNet interfaces. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as this goes, it's very complex stuff. It's not your everyday lighting design for architecture. It really takes a lot of
Hmm.
detail and a lot of hardware as well as software to achieve. And so, really, what you're doing is you're providing a software that allows a smoother control over all of this equipment that you have, so that you can have a much more streamlined result and a more satisfying result in some cases.
Yes, I mean, it's a difficult problem when you're designing the network architecture, the hardware that you choose, everything that you choose. you have to assume that 99% of the time you're not going to ever have a person out there. So what we have to do is we have to treat it like under every failed update, for instance. What does that look like? Are we going to lose it and we're going to have to ask a customer to plug in a laptop and screen share, or are we going to have to ship somebody out there and fly them out, And that's costly, and that's not something that, we plan for because that's not what it's designed. So we have to assume that under any case, as long as it has power and internet, we should be able to control it. If we lose internet, we send out a notification. That's something that's out of our control, if they lose their internet on site for whatever reason. But if we have internet, we need to be able to control it.
All right, I have two follow-up questions for you. So regarding your
Okay.
internet and the controller, should you lose
Yep.
internet, does the customer still have local access to trigger shows? Can they, get onto their local network with their Wi-Fi and just trigger directly to the device, or are you 100% dependent on cloud?
It is a hybrid of both, so pretty close to what you said. The system still runs. So there is a local, we have a localized server. It's built around Linux, and it still does its job when the internet goes out. The management of the device is what breaks down. So we can no longer manage the device, but everything that they have scheduled, their overrides, their playlist, all of those things, it just still runs because it has an internal clock, and it just keeps on going about its business. And then they just get a notification that says, we can't currently update your controller, or system is offline.
Okay. All right, cool. I just wanted to clarify that because that could be a bone of contention for some people if it was only cloud accessible and, areas that are prone to internet issues, things like that. Now, back to sort of your product and your setup. Obviously, whether you're using ArtNet or streaming ACN or, SPI, it's like you said, it is complicated. The average user is not setting this up. So as far as, from a larger scale, are you sending technicians out every time, or are you working with local integrators to support your installations?
Great question. So what we do is we work with the customer early on and assist them with the lighting design of their property. We try to get an understanding of what their goals are, what type of customer do they want to attract, do they care about exterior? There's so many questions that you have to ask, and some customers may just want to do interior, for instance, or they want to do both. So we ask a bunch of questions and we get an understanding, and then we work with their architects to design essentially our recommendation within their budget. Then from there, we have integration guides and install guides integration that a local electrician would do. So they do the install during whether it's a new build, whether it's new construction, or it's a remodel. They go and they put the lights up according to where we've positioned them in the drawings. And then once they say, okay, we have power, we have internet, we're ready to get this thing started up, we go through a handful of remote tests at that point. And just to confirm, yes, we have internet. Yes, all of the light fixtures are responding. DMX is active. ArtNet, all of those things is working as expected. And then we would send a technician out to go and do the startup. And the startup realistically is the mapping. That's when we spend our time doing the pixel mapping. On more simple installations, we don't have to send a tech out. When it's based more on straight lines and 90-degree angles, it's not difficult for us to remotely map it based off some pictures or a video. And the reason that we do need pictures and we need it back from the customers, because often we will design it early on and construction just changes. It's not going to be exactly according to where we planned it, and that's okay. And that's why we don't do any of the pixel mapping based solely off of the drawings that we did a year prior or 6 months prior. We actually map it only after everything is installed, powered up, and then we can confirm that it's working and we confirm the exact position. we're working on a couple clever ways to eliminate that trip. There's some overhead there, you know, and as a business owner, it can get a little expensive sending technicians out. So we're working on some clever ways using LiDAR on iPhones and things like that. We're looking at for essentially like a smart mapping where at that point they can just install the lights anywhere and then they go and scan the property and it builds its own digital version. Yeah.
So I mean, you know, from your perspective though, you're really trying to stay as hands off for the owner as possible, which I think is really great because a lot of systems out there rely on contractors or owners to fully understand their systems and be able to help you through a troubleshooting process or something. But you know, what's really surprising to me is before you even send a technician out, you actually have a lot of safeguards in place that I haven't heard of before, at least with most of the bigger groups, which is that you vet the system remotely before you even go out there to the site, which, you know, I think is really quite innovative because a lot of times in the architectural world for just static white lighting, you have a checkbox or a series of checkboxes on a sheet that gets submitted, and you have to trust that, yes, this is the truth. It could be the truth based to the contractor's perspective who filled it out, but in reality, when the tech gets out there, it's like, whoa, 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 this isn't at all what we asked for. And then they have to schedule another visit. Whereas for you, you're trying to avoid that from happening at all costs because it is expensive. And also there's a huge finger pointing event that happens when a tech goes out prematurely. And so I think that, you know, honestly, I would love to see that more often in any lighting control system, not just these specialty systems.
Yeah, that was the finger pointing is what triggered that remote test step in our process. Yeah, it was there's just so much of it, and it was frustrating because the customer is looking to us to make the system run, and therefore we inherit everybody else's problems involved in the process. It doesn't matter if it is a wiring issue or a power issue or things that are completely outside of our control. They still look to us to make it work. So yeah, we do have a checklist still. We have a checklist that they sign and they docu-sign it. And it's essentially agreeing that it is at this place with specific notes. They supply the pictures. And then once that's signed, then at that point, we would schedule the remote tech, or we would schedule one of our technicians in-house to remotely assist them. And it really is as simple as just getting on a video call. We just do a video call very similar to this, and they walk around the property and we go through a series of checks and we just trigger it remotely and we look for specific behavior. There's the obvious, is the fixture going red? Is it going blue? Is it going green? And then there's a couple other additional checks that are important for pixel mapping, and that is what direction is the data flowing? Is it coming from, the northwest corner of the building, or is it coming from the southeast? Where is that moving from? So by just playing a gradient, a red to black gradient is what we tend to do. It's really easy to see quickly. Is it moving? Is it sequential? If it's not sequential, that's not a big deal because we can just re-hit the addresses of the fixtures and, we would get them back in line again. So yeah, having that control is critical for a piece of software like this. I don't think we would be able to do it without those checks.
No, and I think again, it's an expensive thing when you have to fly a tech out to a site to program, and then to find out I can't actually program yet. That's a real big, speed bump for a lot of projects, and there's a lot of wasted money as a result of that. So again, I really kind of tip my hat to you on that endeavor because I think a lot of people could take that idea and run with it and really benefit from it. But ultimately, I mean, what you are doing is a very expensive endeavor anyways, because pixel mapping's costly. It's not simple lighting. It takes a huge amount of time programming. So I'm just curious, how much time during the design process do you spend working on these systems?
We've actually gotten pretty efficient at it, believe it or not. It's maybe it's just because we're familiar with car washes, perhaps, but I would say if everything is installed correctly, perfectly to the T, we will typically pick a later flight out. That way we're arriving closer to dusk. If they have exterior lighting, we have to work at nighttime. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll work until 4 or 5 in the morning. We can get it done in the night. And we can
Wow.
just get all the building interior and exterior done in a single night. And then typically the next night is follow-up checks. We'll do the same thing, another late night again. And it's just lots of follow-up checks to make sure everything is, behaving as expected and just moving and running in the correct direction. And then at that point, it's just getting their sequences processed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times what takes pixel mapping so long is because you have to pixel map for the pixel map. So when you're designing a sequence, it has to be built for that map. And we took a slightly different approach that I don't want to share too much on, but we took an approach where we're able to map it, and then we're able to process accordingly. I'll put it that way. So we're able to process sequences according to the map. So what that gives us, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to clarify to our listeners so that they understood.
Yeah.
When you say you're mapping to the map, basically the resolution of that pixel map, the dimensions of that map is unique to the project, and so you need to program it specifically for that project. You can't just have a blank slate of that. And so I just wanted to jump in
Mhm.
to explain that.
Yes, yeah, and it's that is the most fundamental problem with pixel mapping and architectural lighting, in my opinion. I think that is the biggest, most difficult problem. How do you have a controller that has pixel mapping, but how do you sustainably design for that many maps? It's that's not a sustainable thing. So we have a layer in between the actual lighting designers that are designing what the lights do and what the pixel map is on the end. And we've got some clever stuff going on where we're able to marry those two things and treat it more like a kind of like a lighting design factory. We're able to feed in the designs and then process according to a specific piece of property.
Sure.
So are you doing a lot of pre-visualization on the front end with your clients as well? I guess one is part of your sales pitch, but then also for your own technicians for programming, because it sounds like you're doing everything you can to minimize your time on site. So if you've got a project that has a lot of
Mhm.
sequences, I'd have to imagine you're building a lot of those prior to going to the site.
Yes, yeah, we have what we call just a catalog of sequences. So we have a lot of stuff that is pre-built, and then we build according to like a subcategory of building. So for instance, again talking about car washes, we have a catalog that is designed for car washes because car washes are a rectangle almost always. Now, you can expand that rectangle. That rectangle could turn into a square if they have really big vacuum canopies. Maybe it's a full service car wash and they have a bunch of detail bays, So from a bird's eye view, it might be more like a square, but overall, they tend to be a rectangle. So we have a catalog that's built for that, and then we have a catalog that is built for hotels. And so we do have some delineation between the types of buildings, but we don't have to do a lot of visualizing. We don't have to do a lot of visualizing on the front end to decide how it's going to work because of the way that we've written the software. If we process something from the car wash catalog to a car wash, there might be a little bit of touch up work that's needed, but it is I'll call it 99.9% hands off. We can programmatically reprocess for that location the sequence from the catalog. Now there's server times, there's processing, there's cost associated with it, but from a software development perspective, it is hands off from a human's perspective.
So then, what does that initial conversation when it comes to programming look like? Is that in early stages of the design phase, or is it while you're on site with the owner?
It's we discuss we discuss our capabilities more than anything. We don't really have to. I'm trying to think. Yeah, we don't really talk too much about what the lights are going to do early on because our capabilities, once we have the map, we can more or less do just about anything. It kind of comes down to artistic ability at that point more than technical ability. So we don't really have to have that conversation early on. We do show them what other systems are capable of. We show them videos. We also have a demo. We have a 3D demo that we put together that you can pan and scroll and zoom around a car wash that's actually running our software in the browser. It's pretty unique. And so we show them that. That way they can get an idea of what the system can do. But it really isn't until the end, after we've done the startup, the mapping is complete, their logins are created for the app. At that point, we process the sequences for their location. And then if there's specific things that they want the building to do, like to support their brand, for instance, then that's when we have one of our people actually design specifically for that property. So we have the capability of both. We try to stay away from too much manual creation, again, because it's cost. There's a lot of,
Sure.
that's the most expensive part of stage design, right? Is somebody sitting behind a console and working for hours and hours. So yeah, we try to
Well, and
limit
that's
that, but we also charge. So
yeah. So I
go
mean,
ahead.
that is the one of the major hurdles in our industry is content generation. And so, if you have a way of short circuiting that process, it really is a cost effective solution. But I think from your perspective, you do have this library of options already programmed, which I think is a really smart move to do, because otherwise you are having to start from scratch every single time, which I think a lot of
Yeah.
integrators, programmers, software engineers in our industry do end up doing in certain cases, especially because, unlike with your business model where you're constantly doing car washes and hotels with these experiences, a lot of integrators don't have those spectacular big color changing pixel mapped events that they deal with on a daily basis, and so they have to start from scratch because there's no purpose to create a library.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not permanently. A lot of the installs I think you're describing are not permanent installations, right? Unless you're talking about like a church, that would be permanently installed.
Sure. I mean, they're either they're permanently installed and they're infrequent, or they're temporary and there's a lot more of them. But
Mhm.
to your point, they're expensive. They take a lot of time. And so what makes your business model competitive is the fact that you're nimble. You're able to kind of approach a job without having to do huge heavy lifting at the beginning of the project, which
Mhm.
is in some cases what people have to do when they're designing something really unique and spectacular like this.
Absolutely. I think the flexibility of the way it's designed, it makes it a lot easier. And to be honest, a lot of this wasn't even, I feel like we didn't even plan for a lot of this. It kind of was a byproduct of how we just chose to create the software originally. We just kind of got fortunate and maybe not lucky, but we just got fortunate in a lot of cases where building the software stack and the hardware stack the way we did allows flexibility both in the design process, the actual installation of the fixtures, the startup, and everything after, all of the support that comes after and sequencing. It's a really it's a really easy way for us to mass process these specialized pixel map locations. and those things just don't go hand in hand together
Sure.
at all. So it is a difficult problem to solve for sure.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that you're lucky. I would say that you approach this with a very intellectual mindset and a really keen eye for how best to achieve a cost-effective result. So, yeah, okay, fine. You got jobs and you were fortunate that way, but at the same time, you filled in a niche that wasn't being filled in our industry. I
Hmm.
don't think there's a huge number of manufacturers out there that are targeting car washes for this kind of effect. So, having that opportunity, you really kind of lasered in. So, but we're almost out of time here. So I just want to summarize what we've talked
Hmm.
about here, just in general, because it's really interesting stuff. So ultimately, you've taken theatrical and industrial lighting and controls design and combine them. And something we haven't touched on is the industrial aspect. Yeah, and I think it would probably bore people to tears if we went into the details of that. But ultimately,
Yeah.
industrial lighting controls design is not attractive. It's not flashy. It's very, very mundane. But because it needs to endure
Hmm.
really well, whereas theatrical is that flashy, but it tends to be more flimsy, more easily broken. And so you're taking these two
Hmm.
seemingly incongruous aspects and merging them together to create this
Yeah.
spectacular experience. A lot of people don't think, oh, hey, car wash or hotel or anything like that, I'm going to have this awesome lighting experience. Whereas in reality, you can, and because car washes are so ubiquitous now, and people do need to wash their cars, the higher sell point
Hmm.
is, hey, let's make it an entertaining experience. And so what you did on top of that is you developed a software platform to really allow a nimble, flexible, easy, and cost-effective solution for people to utilize and create those experiences. No matter what the dimensions or the needs of the project are, you can really satisfy that. And finally, you've found a way to eliminate the owner from having to involve themselves in a troubleshooting process. And that is, honestly, I can't tell you how many people, if they heard that they didn't have to think about their lighting controls, if something goes wrong, they just call and somebody takes care of it. I'd have
Hmm.
sold them on it. It didn't matter what it was. They'd be like, yes, give it to me right now. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's really fascinating, this trajectory that you've got here. And I'm really curious to see where you go with this, but it's really fantastic stuff.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well,
So
thank you so much for joining us here today. Again, really interesting stuff, and keep us posted on where you go, and hopefully we'll have you back with an update.
yeah, that'd be awesome. I really appreciate you guys inviting me on.
Well, thank you, Adam, for that wonderful conversation. I hope you guys all learned something about Adam's unique business and where he fits into the market. Please do not forget to check out the lightingcontrolspodcast.com for more information and to get yourself some sweet merch. And do not forget to check us out on all your social media channels. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. You can find us there. You can get all the news and updates, find out when all the latest episodes are released, and everything that you want to find out about the lighting industry in general. Just want to take a minute to remind everyone that this week's episode is presented by the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Adam.